I am so glad you are back on the show with me today. We are going to uncover and discover the compelling reasons as to why it is so important to promote cultural diversity at work and at school. If you are new to the podcast and the YouTube channel, my name is Jeba Edmonds. I am the host of the Cultural Curriculum Chat podcast and Mrs. Edmonds Cultural Corner, where we talk all things multicultural educational practices at school and at work. So for today's episode, we are going to dive deep into why it is so important to foster our diverse students and our diverse colleagues and employees. I have found an amazing article by Drexel University School of Education. They talk about the trends as to our cultural diverse population, and that the trend is it is going to continue to grow. In their article, they are talking about how in 2024, the U.S. Census predicts that over half of our nation's populations will be our people of color. Now, some of us think about when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion practices or inclusion as a whole, we're only having that narrow lens as to race and ethnicity. Now, diversity is not just race and ethnicity, it is a multitude of other identities. For example, we've got religion, we have diverse gender, we have abilities, we even have people that identify in different sexual orientation, as well as people that have probably served in the military or people that have disabilities as well. So those are the different, just a small facet of people of all diverse backgrounds. And like I said, we are continuing to evolve as a society, and that list is going to continue to grow. So being aware of the multifaceted groups of people in our nation will keep us moving forward to acknowledge and as well as respect. So I highly recommend this article. It talks more in depth of the importance of having cultural diversity in your classroom. And I will link that article in the show notes. So when we talk about how we should promote our diverse students, just getting some of their advice from the article, they said, get to know your students as a whole, to acknowledge that they exist. My biggest thing when I was an educator in the classroom, I always made sure that I didn't look at the cumulative file the first 6 weeks of the school year. I didn't want any previous teacher biases to cloud my judgment. I wanted to meet that child in my classroom and get to know them, get to see how they interacted with their fellow peers. And that really helped me build that bond of just those fresh eyes. Now, going further into the school year, of course, I checked the cumulative file, but I wanted to start the school year in a positive and clean slate and not that second guessing from a colleague from the previous years before. And another thing too, when we're talking about promoting our diverse students, is to keep communication clear. Not all students will listen to you verbally and be able to process. So in my classroom, I always had clear expectations. We followed the responsive classroom model of behavior in our schools and even PBIS. But what I love to do is with that clear expectations, that would be posted throughout the classroom so the students and myself would also recognize and also check in to those clear expectations. to acknowledge our students as a whole and respect. A lot of us don't know where our students are coming from. We only have them in a small amount of time in our day and in our care. And so acknowledging that they are here, showing them who they are, and meeting them where they're at in a respectful way would be wonderful. A lot of us educators out there, there's so many things about implicit bias, and I really would highly suggest you take that Harvard Project Implicit test. It is free, and that will help you get into this acknowledge your student and respect who they are by harnessing their different cultural backgrounds. Another thing I really recommend is to incorporate diversity in your classroom lesson plans. A lot of us just get into that comfort zone of getting that basal reader or getting the curriculum that has already been mandated from our district office, and that is okay to use that as a guideline, but it shouldn't be the gospel. So I highly recommend you going out and looking this time of year. I know we're enjoying ourselves this summer, and you will be hearing this towards the beginning of the school year. This is the time to start getting those fresh pair of eyes and researching and getting as many multicultural educational resources from different places and get yourself ready to go. Don't wait for ethnic holidays in your calendar to start doing these type of practices. The more you infuse it into your day-to-day, the better it will be, and the more your students will recognize that you see them as a student, and they can feel taller and sit a little prouder by knowing that you see them as the individual and you have proper representation of them. That's more than just a poster or a book on the bookshelf. And another thing that I remember in my years of being a teacher, I had to really focus in and stop micromanaging my students. That's a big thing. A lot of us educators, we know our students are capable of doing great things. And a lot of the time, a lot of us teachers want to take that ownership themselves, and we don't sit back and let our students flop. We don't let them make the mistake. We want them to really be critical thinkers, and having that pause and letting them learn and problem solve with their peers. This is a time where we need to stop the micromanaging and start being that facilitator. Have that constructivist attitude in our philosophy of letting our students mind and shape and work through those complex problems. Not saying we're going to try and look at ways and let them have a free-for-all, but I really want you to step back and really watch and be amazed of what your students can do. So on the other hand, when we're talking about education and why it is so important, you know as well as I do with current events, there is so much going on, so much animosity, so few of the discourse. And I really want you to think very deeply as to conversations, having those cultural norms in your classroom. There's no name calling. We listen even if we don't agree on some opinions, and definitely finding fact-based arguments. A lot of the times when we are trying to have these open discussions, it tends to get very escalated. And as the educator and facilitator in the classroom, it is your job to harness that energy and enjoy how students are starting to problem solve with what's outside, but also have a safe, belonging environment where students can voice their opinion without the fear of getting, the backlash or animosity towards their friends. So it's a very fine line, but I feel like if you start to establish the cultural norms and ways of practicing little by little, albeit in your morning meetings or your snack discussion times, or even before you leave at the end of the day. Just having things where you can have that discussion with your students to know that they can healthily have discussion without having any disciplinary recourse on their end. Another thing I really want you to think about when we're talking about harnessing and promoting inclusivity, I want you educators to reflect as to what students do you know is being left behind? What student do you know is getting targeted in a negative way? Are they feeling that they're being intimidated by other peers in their classroom? What types of behaviors are you noticing? And a lot of that time, the behaviors we're noticing is not during our structural instruction time. It's usually during that free time where we're in transition from subject to subject, or we're in the hallway, or we're at an assembly. So really take note and try and see if there are places that students do feel like they belong. I also highly recommend each school have some sort of cultural group, after school activity, or even a club that has diverse voices in it, and give students that safe space where they can go and be themselves. And it's okay if your students still need that time to trust you. Don't force something that isn't there. It's going to take some time. It could, very well be in the middle of the year, but just give that student that breadth and that depth to make them feel comfortable to come up to you if things are awry. Another thing when we talk about from the education side to the workforce side, I highly recommend those same talking points when I talked about with education. I highly recommend you acknowledge your colleague and your employee. Give them the due and the respect that they deserve. Keep your communication clear. A lot of people, especially people from different countries, they don't quite understand some of our United States idioms and nuances. So taking the time to break it down more clearly will really help get that communication clear. For example, if someone says, "Oh, I'm just joshing you," that for us, our vernacular in American society is, "Oh, I'm just joking," or "I'm pulling your leg," but we're not physically pulling that person's leg. But somebody from a different cultural background might not understand that that's being a joke. They might ask, "Well, who's Josh? We don't have Josh in our office." Or, "No, you're not touching my leg. What's going on?" And it does have a few laughs, and things do get stuck in translation. But thinking about to be more in that culturally responsive place, make sure your language does matter, and think about how you're conveying your message in a way that's clear for both of you to understand. Another thing, again, is to acknowledge and respect. A lot of us come from very different backgrounds at work, and a lot of us have that same goal to do what is expected of us at work, as well as going back to our families to have a prosperous life for them. So I want you to keep that in mind. Some people may not be so warm up to going to functions outside of work, and that's okay. A lot of people might not have the ability to do that because of their family obligations. And to harness that of trying to think outside the box, maybe do a function during the work day that everybody can participate, but keeping that door open so when that person is ready to join, that door is there. Another thing I want you to do is when you are incorporating diverse professional development, I highly recommend you hiring somebody that is not affiliated with your organization. A lot of the times when we are doing diverse initiatives, especially in the DEI and B space, a lot of people think that, "Oh, we have somebody of that diverse identity in our organization. Why don't they come in and teach us a lesson?" And 9 times out of 10, you're not willing to pay your diverse colleague or employee because they're already on the payroll. And that really harnesses an animosity. It really makes that person feel tokenized. And so going outside of your organizations to hire someone who is in their diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging practice to come into your facility and do that facilitation work in D, E, and I, and B spaces really lets your diverse employees and colleagues feel like, wow, thank you for noticing that I'm not the one to take on this work that we all should collectively be doing. And that is something I think is very important. I, in my business, have helped over 60 organizations, for-profit and non-for-profit organizations, that have come to me asking me to develop inclusive workplace strategies and creating diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging statements and action plans. And if you are interested in hiring me to help facilitate that, my information of my business consulting is on my website, and I will have that in the description below. Another thing too, when you're talking about harnessing and making people of diverse backgrounds at work feel more seen and valued, here's another tip. Stop micromanaging us. You hired us as the best candidate for the position. Let us show you our best, okay? To keep that frank. So just make sure that when you are doing that, you need to step back and take heed that your employees and your colleagues, they are well equipped and they know what they're doing. Their credentials speak for themselves. And if they have some things where they need your guidance and they need your help with, they'll let you know. And so that's something I really also want you to keep in mind, because when you're in a majority culture setting and you are one of the very few employees or colleagues in a corporation or in an organization, 9 times out of 10, those people in that identity always feel the extra scrutinizing eye of their work compared to their colleague. There is another big alarming statistic that said 30% of people of color that have left their organization is because of how they were treated in the workplace, with the lack of, not even saying endorsement, but the lack of trust within the people in their organization. And I will link that as well in the show notes to do more research about that. So if you are an educator, or even if you are a person working in the workforce, I really want you to use this as wonderful advice to keep going and to understand the importance to promote diversity and inclusion in our school and at work. Another thing too, if you really want to dive deep on how to build those cross-cultural connections, my season 3 talks about how you can build those cross-cultural connections more in depth. And if you are an educator, because you know it, school is right around the corner. I know, I said the S word. I want to get you ready by fostering this sense of belonging and cultural richness in your classroom. I have created a wide range of African heritage and African American literacy and social studies lesson plans for kindergarten through 12th grade, Common Core student standards based, and it is available on my shop, jebaedmonds.com/shop. You are going to have a special bonus, okay? For a limited time, you're going to use the coupon code BELONG, because all of our students need that sense of belonging from this next school year and from the future moving forward. So don't miss this opportunity, folks, to create that inclusive and diverse learning environment by getting your lesson plans right now. The lesson plans are downloadable, and you can have that within 24 hours with getting your book and your lesson plan, which comes with a graphic organizer or even a comprehension pack that has the book and the title to go with. I've got stories from Hurricane Child to Firebird to Ellen's Broom to I Am Enough. There's so many titles. I cannot wait for you to explore it. So definitely check it out on jebaedmonds.com/shop, and it's all there right at your fingertips. Well, that is all that I have for you today. But before we go, I'm going to ask you this question. How can we challenge stereotypes and foster cultural awareness in our schools and in our workplace? And I want you to answer that question for me in the comments below. That's all that I have for you today, and I will see you here same time next week. Bye-bye.